Danielle never expected that the man who spilled coffee on her sweater would later offer her $10,000 to pretend she was his wife. It had been a long morning at Patricia's kitchen, and Danielle's apron already smelled like fried okra and cinnamon toast. The breakfast rush had barely ended when a tall man in a navy suit brushed through the door, his phone still pressed to his ear and a to-go coffee in his hand. He didn't notice the slick spot near the counter where a toddler had dropped a straw wrapper seconds ago. Danielle turned just in time to see him lose his footing. She stepped forward instinctively, too late. The man stumbled, tried to recover, and flung his arm out for balance. The coffee cup slipped from his grip and hit her square in the chest. "Oh no," he muttered, immediately pulling out a handkerchief. "I am so sorry." Danielle looked down at the brown splash darkening her pale blue sweater. "It's fine," she said automatically, even though it clearly wasn't. She sighed, brushing at the damp fabric. "No burns, thankfully." "I'll pay for dry cleaning," the man offered, genuinely flustered. "Let me—" "It's all right, really?" She cut in gently, half smiling despite herself. "You okay?" He blinked at her, surprised. Most people would have snapped, but she just stood there, tired but composed. Her hands stained with coffee and her curls frizzing slightly from the kitchen heat. Before he could respond, she turned back toward the kitchen window to grab an order. On her way, she paused to refill an older woman's tea. "There you go, Miss Evelyn. Extra lemon, just how you like it." "Bless your heart, Danielle," the woman said, patting her hand. "Don't let that city fella ruin your day." Danielle laughed softly and shrugged. "He's just in a hurry." The man lingered near the entrance for a moment longer before leaving a strange expression on his face. That night, after the dinner shift ended and Zoe was tucked in at home with her crayons and cartoons, Danielle wiped down the counter one last time. The bell above the door jingled, and when she looked up, it was him again, the suited stranger with the coffee incident. "I owe you a new sweater," he said, offering a tentative smile. Danielle raised an eyebrow. "You tracked me down to make good on that." He hesitated. "Not exactly. I wanted to talk." She studied him more carefully this time. Early 30s, sharp jawline but tired eyes. A man who'd worked too many hours and carried something heavy behind his polite tone. "All right," she said, nodding toward an empty booth. "Kitchen's closed, but the coffee pot's still warm." They sat across from each other, the checkered tablecloth between them, slightly frayed at the edges. She poured him a cup without asking and slid it over. He didn't touch it. "My name's Graham. Graham Langston." Danielle's eyes narrowed slightly. The name sounded familiar, too familiar. Like the Langston Tech Group. He nodded. "Okay, now I'm nervous," she said, crossing her arms. "What does a billionaire want with a waitress?" "It's odd," he admitted, running a hand through his neatly combed hair. "But I need help, and I think you might be the right person." She waited. "My mother just finished chemo. She's recovering well, but fragile. He exhaled, voice tightening. "I told her I got married." Danielle blinked. "You what?" She was so happy. She said she could rest easy knowing I wasn't alone. I didn't have the heart to tell her it wasn't true. "So you lied." He nodded once. "And now?" "She wants to meet my wife. She insists on hosting Thanksgiving. Family's coming down from Atlanta. I was going to hire someone from an agency, but then I saw you today. You were calm under pressure, kind, grounded. You spilled coffee on me." "I did." "And you still refilled a stranger's tea." Danielle glanced away, fingers tightening around her mug. "What exactly are you asking?" 3 days. Pretend to be my wife. Smile for a few photos, answer a few questions. Nothing intimate, nothing weird. I'll pay you $10,000. She stared at him. "That's insane." "I know. I work 2 jobs to keep the lights on and care for my niece. And now some man walks in and offers me a fake marriage and 10 grand. It's just for the weekend." Danielle stood, then sat again, too stunned to settle. She thought of Zoe's laugh, the way she hugged that crayon-colored turkey every November. "One day we'll have a real Thanksgiving," she'd whisper. "Can Zoe come?" Danielle asked suddenly. Graham hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, of course. No lies except the one about us being married. And no touching. This is a job, not a romance novel." He looked amused. "Understood." Danielle bit her lip, thoughts spinning. Rent. Groceries. Zoe's dentist bill. $10,000 was more than she'd made all year. I want everything in writing, she said finally. Deal. They shook hands across the table. The next morning, the diner smelled like cinnamon rolls and bacon grease. Danielle arrived early, her curls pinned up in a scarf, the same coffee-stained sweater under her apron laundered overnight, but still showing a faint tan blotch near the hem. She poured a mug for herself and looked out the window where the early sun filtered through Spanish moss hanging like lace across the quiet street. Zoe was still asleep back at their rented duplex, tucked beneath her rainbow blanket, her favorite plush tiger curled under one arm. Danielle hadn't told her anything yet. How do you explain to a 9-year-old that you're about to fake marry a stranger for money? Patricia, the silver-haired owner of the diner, popped her head through the kitchen hatch. You all right this morning, sweetheart? You look like someone offered you a ride to the moon. Danielle gave a tired laugh, more like a trip into madness. Well, don't forget to bring back some moon pie. Patricia grinned, disappearing again. The regulars started filtering in by 7:30. Evelyn with her crossword puzzle. Mr. Darnell with his World War II. 2 veteran hat and 2 teenagers who always ordered pancakes with whipped cream and didn't tip. Danielle moved through her motions smoothly, but her mind wasn't on syrup and sunny side-ups. It was on Graham Langston and the contract he'd emailed overnight. She'd read it 3 times before bed. Solid legal language, respectful boundaries. 3 days Thanksgiving weekend, Zoe included. No physical affection, no sleeping arrangements implied a 5-figure payment deposited up front into a separate bank account. It read less like a romance and more like a consulting gig. When her shift ended, Danielle walked 2 blocks down to the old library on Montgomery Street where Zoe liked to color. As she entered the children's room, she spotted her niece sitting cross-legged by the felt board pressing crayon drawings into her backpack. Ready to go? Danielle asked. Zoe looked up with a grin. Yep. Miss Janice let me keep the turkey we made. Want to see? She pulled out a lopsided paper cutout with a pilgrim hat and sparkly eyes. Danielle smiled and crouched next to her. You made him fancy this year. He's Mr. Gobbleton, Zoe said proudly. He's going to sit at our table for Thanksgiving. Danielle paused, fingers brushing the edge of the paper. Would you maybe like to spend Thanksgiving somewhere different this year? Zoe looked at her with suspicion. Like where? Big house, trees with lights, pecan pie, nice people, maybe even a dog. Zoe narrowed her eyes. Is this a trick to get me to eat broccoli? Danielle laughed and ruffled her hair. No, baby, it's kind of a job. For me. And they want us both to come. Will there be cranberry sauce? I'll make sure of it. That night, Danielle invited Graham to meet them at Patricia's after closing. Zoe sat beside her in the booth, swinging her legs as Graham slid into the seat across from them. He looked less polished this time, his tie-gone jacket folded beside him and his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. He smiled politely at Zoe. You must be Zoe. You're Mr. Fancy Shoes, she declared, folding her arms. Danielle choked on her water. Graham blinked. I suppose I am. Zoe tilted her head. Do you have a pool? No, he said, amused. But I do have a closet full of board games. Zoe considered this. Do you cheat? Never. She nodded, satisfied. Okay, you're cool. Graham's gaze flicked to Danielle, surprised and maybe relieved. She gave him a small shrug as if to say, Don't look at me. She's the boss. Danielle reached into her bag and slid the signed copy of the contract across the table. No surprises, she said. And we ride in my car. Graham smiled faintly. Fair enough. I have conditions, she added, sipping her coffee. Let's hear them. 1, you don't try to fix me. I'm not some wounded bird. I wasn't planning to. 2, you don't make this cute. I don't need flirtation. I need clarity. I prefer clarity over charm. And 3, she said, leaning in slightly, Zoe comes first. Always. Graham's expression softened. Understood. They sat in silence for a beat, just the low hum of the dishwasher in the back. Outside, a street performer strummed an old guitar near the lamplight, his voice faint and warm through the windows. You ever lie before? Danielle asked, almost teasing. Graham's eyes held hers. More than I should. But not like this. She looked down at the diner pie between them. Pecan slightly cracked on top, 2 forks resting on paper napkins. Guess we're really doing this, she murmured. You're doing me a kindness, Graham said, quiet. I won't forget that. Danielle looked away. Don't make it bigger than it is. I'm doing what's needed. He nodded. She took the fork and cut a piece of pie. The next day brought a gray chill to Savannah, with mist curling along the cobblestone streets and clinging to wrought iron fences like a secret. Danielle stood outside her car with Zoe double-checking the list she'd made: toothbrush socks, Zoe's bedtime bunny, her emergency contact card. Everything they owned that felt like comfort was folded neatly into one duffel. Inside the diner, Patricia waited with a thermos of cocoa and a paper bag of biscuits. "So you're off to play house?" she said gently, tucking a strand of hair behind Danielle's ear, like a mother would. "Just remember who you are, baby girl." Danielle smiled, heartful and sore. "I won't forget." Zoe ran ahead, skipping along the sidewalk toward Graham's car, which gleamed like something from a showroom. She circled it twice, peeking through the windows. Whoa, heated seats. Danielle followed more slowly. Graham stepped out as they approached, dressed in jeans and a dark peacoat, looking surprisingly casual. He opened the trunk without a word and took their bags, placing them next to a neatly packed suitcase and a bottle of spring water. "You ready?" he asked. Danielle didn't answer right away. She looked up at the gray sky, then down at her niece's eager face. "I'm trusting you," she said simply. Graham met her eyes. "And I won't betray that." The drive out of Savannah was quiet at first. Zoe plugged into her coloring tablet in the back seat, humming quietly. Danielle sat rigid in the passenger seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. After half an hour, Graham glanced over. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she replied, watching pine trees blur past the window. "Just not used to luxury vehicles or fake marriages." He smirked a little, but said nothing. They arrived just before dusk. The Langston estate sat on a slight hill outside of Augusta, an old southern home with white columns and wraparound porches lit by soft amber bulbs strung along the eaves. It was picturesque, like something from a movie where nothing bad ever happened. But Danielle's stomach clenched anyway. As they stepped out of the car, the front door opened. A woman in her early 60s stood in a thick cardigan, her silver hair pulled back, her cheeks rosy from the cold. Vivian Langston. Danielle noticed the oxygen tank first, then the way the woman leaned on the frame just slightly, like her body wanted to rest, but her heart refused to miss this moment. Graham stepped forward. "Mama." Vivian's face lit up. "There's my boy." They hugged gently, Graham careful with her frail frame. Then he turned to Danielle, who held Zoe's hand tightly. "And this," Graham said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, "is Danielle." Vivian's eyes sparkled. "Oh, honey," she said, pulling Danielle into a light embrace. "You're even more beautiful than he described." Danielle froze, then slowly returned the hug. "It's so lovely to meet you, ma'am. And this must be Zoe." Vivian knelt slightly, breath hitching. "Are you my new granddaughter?" Zoe blinked. Kind of. Everyone laughed too hard, like nerves trying to pass for joy. Inside the house smelled like rosemary and cornbread. A fireplace crackled in the main room, and the soft clink of china came from somewhere deeper in. Vivian led them to the sitting area, pointing out old photos on the walls, a younger Graham in a graduation cap, a black and white wedding portrait of Vivian and her late husband, a family reunion with faces faded by time and sunlight. Danielle's breath caught when she noticed something, a spot on the mantel holding a framed sign that read, "In this house we believe in second chances." Later, Graham showed Danielle and Zoe their room upstairs. It was modest by Billionaire standards, a queen bed, floral quilts, a small desk with stationery that smelled faintly of lavender. Zoe immediately claimed the corner with the window and started unpacking her crayons. Danielle stood by the door, arms crossed. "So far, so good." Graham nodded. "You handled that perfectly." "She hugged me," Danielle said, eyes narrowed. "I didn't expect that. She hasn't smiled like that in months." Danielle hesitated. "What happens if she gets too attached?" "We'll deal with that when we get there. And if someone finds out," "She won't. No one will. The rest of the family thinks we eloped. My mother's blessing is all they care about." Danielle shook her head, walking slowly toward the window. Outside, the porch light buzzed faintly in the dusk. "I don't like lying to good people." Graham's voice came from behind her, low and serious. "Neither do I." Downstairs, the dinner bell rang. They joined the family cousins, an uncle with too many stories, a teenage niece with pink earbuds dangling from one ear. Laughter rolled through the house like a wave, messy and genuine. Vivian watched everything with shining eyes, her hand resting on the arm of Graham's chair, like she didn't want to let go. Danielle smiled when she had to answer questions politely and let her fingers rest on the stem of her water glass like a lifeline. At one point, Graham slipped a sweet potato casserole onto her plate with a silent nod. She blinked, then murmured, "Thank you." When the evening wound down, Vivian took Danielle aside near the piano, her voice conspiratorial. "He never looked this alive before. I think it's you." Danielle swallowed, unsure what to say. Vivian touched her hand. "He used to believe in soulmates, you know. Said one day he'd just know." Danielle blinked. Vivian smiled gently. "I hope it's you, sweetheart. I really do." Danielle could only nod, heart in her throat. Later, after Zoe had gone to bed and the fire burned low, Danielle walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. Graham stood there, already arms crossed, sipping something warm. "She's amazing," Danielle said. "She believes in soulmates," he murmured, glancing up. They looked at each other, two strangers wrapped in someone else's dream. Then he added, just above a whisper, "We're about to lie to the sweetest woman I know." Wearing a borrowed dress and second-hand heels, Danielle stood on the porch of the Langston estate seconds before pretending to be someone's wife. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying not to wobble on the unfamiliar shoes. The navy blue dress hugged her curves a little more than she liked, but it was the only one in Patricia's closet that didn't scream funeral or baby shower. Zoe tugged gently at her hand. "Auntie D," she whispered, standing on tiptoe. "If you get nervous, just hold my hand like you used to when Mama was sick." Danielle bent slightly, brushing a kiss on Zoe's forehead. "You're my brave girl, but I think I'm going to need your hand more than you need mine." Before either of them could say another word, the door swung open. Graham stood there, freshly shaved and impossibly composed in a charcoal sweater over a collared shirt. He took one look at Danielle and paused just long enough that she noticed. "Ready?" he asked, offering the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. She nodded and stepped inside, clutching her small purse like armor. The Langston estate opened up around her like a museum, with warmth gleaming wood floors, walls the color of honeyed cream, and photos framed in brushed gold lining the hallways. She caught a glimpse of Graham at age 10 holding a trophy, another of a family 4th of July picnic under wide oaks. The scent of rosemary and wood polish filled the air, along with something sweeter, like molasses cookies just out of the oven. They entered the main room where Vivian waited on a velvet chair, wrapped in a cream shawl. Her face lit up the moment she saw Danielle. "My goodness," Vivian breathed, slowly rising to her feet. "Look at you. Just stunning." Danielle moved forward, pulse thudding in her ears. "It's so good to see you again, ma'am." Vivian held out both hands. "None of that now. Your family. Call me Mama V, just like everyone else." Danielle hesitated, then took her hands. They were thin, warm, and surprisingly strong. "I'm honored, Mama V." Vivian looked to Zoe. "And you must be the famous Zoe. Do you like cookies?" Zoe beamed. "Only if they've got cinnamon." "Well," Vivian winked, "you're in luck." A cough echoed softly down the stairs. Danielle turned to see a man descending with a casual gait, shirt sleeves rolled up and a crooked grin on his face. His eyes, like Graham's, but warmer, sparked with interest. "Miles Langston," he said, extending a hand. "The better-looking brother?" Danielle shook it, chuckling. "Danielle Holmes, the make-believe wife." Miles whistled. "Well, at least we're honest about the lies." A sharp voice interrupted. "Graham didn't say you were funny." Danielle turned toward a woman in her late 30s with sharp cheekbones and perfectly ironed slacks. Camille Price. She moved like someone used to being listened to. "Camille," Graham said, voice low. "This is Danielle." Camille looked her up and down in one long sweep that could have melted ice. "Well," she said brightly, "aren't you just a breath of fresh air?" Danielle smiled. "And you must be Camille. I've heard absolutely nothing about you." Miles let out a low snort. Camille's expression didn't change. Vivian cleared her throat. "Camille's been like a daughter to me, dear. She and Graham were college friends." "Still are," Camille added quickly, placing a manicured hand on Graham's arm. Danielle noticed the flinch, subtle but real. Before she could say more, a commotion arose in the dining room. A staff member called out for help with the centerpiece, and Vivian turned to Danielle. "Would you mind, sweetheart? I'd love your opinion on the flower arrangement." Of course, Danielle said, grateful for the escape. As they walked, Camille leaned in just enough to murmur, "It's sweet how you try." Danielle didn't miss a beat. "And it's sweeter how you pretend you don't mind." Camille's lips pressed into a tight smile. Inside the dining room, sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains onto a long, polished table set with silver chargers and crystal glasses. The table was dressed in muted golds and warm reds, with linen napkins folded into little harvest fans. A massive floral arrangement waited in the center: orange lilies, crimson mums, and sprigs of pine. Danielle admired it, nodding. "It's beautiful." Vivian took a seat and pointed toward a bowl of pecans. "I like to have everyone do a little something, Shell. A few nuts, peel a few carrots. Makes the meal taste more like home." Danielle picked up the bowl without hesitation, then put me to work. They chatted as they shelled, talking about fall traditions and childhood memories. Danielle told a gentle story about her niece's first attempt at baking sweet potato pie. Vivian laughed so hard she coughed, then patted Danielle's hand. "You bring peace into a room," she said softly. "I don't know how, but it's real." Danielle's throat tightened. From the hallway, she caught a glimpse of Camille watching everything. Later that afternoon, the household buzzed like a hive, simmering pots, clinking silver voices, rising and falling like a southern gospel choir. Camille floated between rooms in a rust-colored blouse and pearls, adjusting napkin folds and dropping comments like petals, each one polite, each one edged. "Danielle," she said, pausing beside the kitchen island. "The staff say you offered to help. That's adorable. But you're a guest now. Don't feel the need to prove anything." Danielle smiled, slicing sweet potatoes with steady hands. "I'm just used to kitchens. They keep my nerves quiet." Camille's laugh was tight. "You know Graham usually dates women who work in design or law. But I suppose warmth comes in all packages." "I guess so," Danielle said lightly, "though Graham and I don't talk much about his past." She didn't look up, but she felt Camille's pause, the way her breath hitched ever so slightly. Then Camille turned with a swish of silk and muttered something about check-in calls and family friends arriving soon. From across the room, Graham caught Danielle's eye. His expression, half apologetic, half amused, lingered for a second before he returned to reviewing travel plans with a cousin near the fireplace. When the sweet potatoes were in the oven and the smell of sage and cornbread started to float through the air, Danielle wandered into the sunroom. Vivian sat by the window, knitting needles clicking quietly. A half-finished scarf, deep green with soft gold flecks, pooled in her lap. "I thought you'd like these colors," Vivian said, not looking up. Danielle stepped closer, touched. "Is that for me?" "Might be. Just in case you catch a chill while walking these oak-lined streets." Vivian smiled, her fingers never slowing. "I always knit when I'm thinking. And you, dear, give me a lot to think about in a good way." Danielle sat beside her, careful not to wrinkle the dress. "Your house is beautiful. Feels like something out of a book." Vivian leaned back, eyes dreamy. "Graham hated those photo shoots growing up. Every Christmas, every summer. But I always said, one day you'll be glad to remember the quiet. He thought I was just being sentimental." "Maybe you were being wise," Danielle said softly. The older woman turned to her, studying her face. "There's something settled about you. Something kind. I didn't expect that. Not from someone Graham brought home so suddenly." Danielle didn't flinch. "Life's been loud for a long time. I guess kindness is how I keep from being swallowed by the noise." Vivian placed a gentle hand on hers. "He needs that. He doesn't even know how much." Before Danielle could respond, a crash echoed from the front hall. She jumped up, heart thudding, and found Zoe standing guiltily beside an overturned basket of magazines. "I was just reaching for the cat," Zoe mumbled. He looked lonely. Miles knelt beside her, already scooping the magazines back into the basket. "It's okay, kiddo. I've been knocking things over in this house for decades." Danielle arrived just as Zoe said, "You're funny, Uncle Miles. Do you have kids?" Miles paused. "Nope. Never found the right person who could outsmart me. What about you?" Got any uncles I should be worried about? Zoe grinned. Nah, just Auntie D. She says men can be like chicken, better cooked slow and seasoned well. Danielle gasped, half mortified, half laughing. Zoe, Miles cracked up. Well, she's not wrong. From a corner, Camille watched the scene with eyes narrowed. Later that night, after most of the guests had gone to bed, and the house had dimmed to soft lamplight and quiet jazz humming through the vents, Graham found Danielle in the kitchen. She was wiping down counters with a worn cloth, moving like someone who needed her hands to stay busy. You didn't have to do this, he said. Danielle shrugged. I do it when I think. Habit. He leaned against the doorframe. My mom, she's not easily impressed. You managed to make her laugh twice and cry once before dessert. That's something. Danielle rinsed the cloth and folded it neatly. She's lovely and lonely. Graham didn't respond right away. He looked older in that moment, tired, maybe even a little ashamed. You handled Camille well, he said finally. Better than I expected. I'm not here to win over your family, Graham. I'm here for the check. And for Zoe. He nodded, but his jaw twitched. As she turned to leave, he added, Still, thank you. She paused in the doorway. Don't thank me yet. We've got a whole weekend ahead. Morning light poured through the tall windows of the Langston estate, soft and gold, as if even the sun knew it was Thanksgiving Eve. The house stirred slowly, clattering pans, distant, humming the scent of cinnamon and roasted pecans curling through the air. Danielle adjusted the sleeves of her cardigan as she walked quietly down the hall, barefoot on polished wood floors that seemed too elegant for her calloused soles. In the kitchen, Camille stood by the counter, flipping through a box of old photographs. Her manicured fingers paused every now and then, holding up glossy moments. Graham in Italy. Graham at a tech conference. Graham shaking hands with a senator. Always alone, always polished. Oh, Camille said sweetly, sensing Danielle's presence. Didn't mean to wake anyone. I was just reminiscing. Danielle walked toward the coffee pot, careful not to bite at the bait. Pictures help us remember what mattered, or what we wanted it to mean. Camille chuckled. Well, Graham certainly made a life worth remembering. All these years and not a single woman in these frames. Makes you wonder. She held up one of the photos, Graham standing beside a luxury yacht, sunglasses on, flanked by business partners. Camille raised a brow. Does this look like a man in love to you? Danielle took the photo, glanced at it, then gently set it down on the counter. Love doesn't always look like a vacation slideshow. There was a long pause. Then Camille's eyes narrowed, just slightly, offered a smile that didn't quite reach her voice. You've got answers for everything, don't you? Danielle poured herself a cup of coffee. No, just perspective. Camille didn't reply. She gathered the photos, slipping them back into the box like loaded cards, and left the room with a quiet heel click. Later, as guests trickled in for the early holiday prep, aunts and cousins and neighbors with casseroles and cranberry jars, Vivian sat in her favorite chair in the front parlor, a soft shawl draped around her shoulders. Her knitting needles rested on her lap, forgotten. Zoe danced between adults, peppering them with questions. What's that smell? Why do you put marshmallows on sweet potatoes? Is that Lady Graham's old girlfriend? Danielle nearly choked on her cider. Zoe, Miles laughed from across the room. That kid's gonna grow up to run for office. Vivian reached for Danielle's hand, her eyes warm. She's a bright one, just like you. You've brought light into this house. Danielle smiled. Just doing my part. Vivian studied her. No, darling. You're doing more than you know. As night crept in, the rooms glowed with soft lamplight, flickering candles, and the hush of old homes breathing after a full day. Danielle found herself in the upstairs hallway, slipping Zoe into bed beneath a quilted comforter. The child whispered, Auntie D, I like it here, even if it smells weird. Danielle chuckled. Smells like wood polish in old books. Zoe grinned sleepily. And pie. Downstairs, Graham stood by the window, watching the reflection of the night wrap around the property. Vivian sat on the settee behind him, her fingers tangled in green yarn she hadn't touched in an hour. She's something else, your Danielle, Vivian said softly. He turned startled, almost forgetting the performance. Vivian continued. She walks like she's bracing for something. But when she talks, it's like the storm passes. Graham said nothing. His throat tightened in a way he hadn't expected. Vivian looked straight at him. If that woman ever leaves you, you fight to get her back. She's good for your soul. Danielle had survived awkward family dinners before, but never one where she had to carve the turkey as someone's fake wife. The smell of roasted garlic sage stuffing and sweet potatoes filled the air as the Langston estate buzzed quietly with holiday rhythm. The morning light spilled through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns over the dining room, where place cards had already been arranged with careful handwriting. Zoe's tiny name had a sunflower drawn next to it, someone's thoughtful touch. Maybe Vivian's. In the kitchen, Graham was standing barefoot in slacks and a Henley shirt, sleeves rolled up, trying and failing not to sneeze as he overpoured ground cinnamon into a bowl. Danielle stifled a laugh as she stepped in. You're supposed to sprinkle it, not baptize the pie. He gave her a sheepish grin. I panicked. You left me alone with nutmeg and I froze. You're a billionaire. You lead teams across continents. I don't usually do it while holding a rubber whisk and pie crust. Danielle grabbed a towel and wiped a streak of flour from his jaw, her hand lingering for just a beat longer than necessary. He noticed but said nothing. Instead, they worked quietly for the next few minutes, side by side, moving in an unexpected rhythm. Zoe popped her head in, holding up a drawing. Look, it's us. The picture showed a house with a red door, 4 smiling stick figures, Danielle, Zoe, Graham, and Vivian beneath a floating Happy Thanksgiving banner. Danielle smiled, her chest tight. Do I really have that much hair? She teased. Zoe nodded seriously. Yep. And Mr. Graham has the same shoes all the time, so I drew him. Graham raised a brow. That's a little scary accurate. Vivian's voice floated from the hallway. Time to dress, everyone. Grace at noon. By 11, the house gleamed with preparation. Candles flickered in glass holders, and napkins had been folded into little fans. The scent of rosemary from the roasting bird mingled with pecan sweetness, filling every corner of the estate. Danielle stood in front of the mirror upstairs, adjusting the borrowed earrings Graham had sent up that morning. Nothing flashy, just elegant drops that caught the light. She could hear her heartbeat. She reminded herself, this is pretend. Downstairs, Vivian wore a plum-colored dress with pearls that caught the sunlight, her lipstick carefully applied, though her hands trembled just slightly. You look beautiful, Vivian, Danielle said as they passed in the hallway. So do you, sweetheart. You're glowing. Danielle smiled, but the compliment felt heavier than expected. At the table, the family gathered, Miles making light jokes, Camille sipping wine like it was strategy, Zoe beaming between them all. Vivian rose slowly, cleared her throat, and looked directly at Danielle. Would you say grace this year? Danielle blinked. She looked to Graham, who gave her a small encouraging nod, then back at Vivian. Of course. She rose, folded her hands, and took a breath. Her voice was steady, warm. Thank you, Lord, for food that fills, for hearts that heal, and for new beginnings, whatever form they take. May this house continue to be full of laughter, and may we always find grace even in the pretending. There was a silence heavy and reverent. Then clinks of silverware, a murmured amen, and the usual Thanksgiving chaos resumed. The dining room glowed under the amber hue of the chandelier, casting soft light on the mismatched china and polished silverware. The turkey sat in its golden splendor at the center of the long mahogany table, surrounded by bowls of candied yams, green beans with crispy bacon, and sweet potato casserole topped with toasted marshmallows. The air was thick with warmth and spice, and something else Danielle couldn't quite name, something that felt like belonging. Miles lifted his glass first. To surprising blessings, he said, glancing with playful warmth toward Zoe, then Danielle. The kind you didn't see coming, but end up grateful for anyway. Danielle smiled and tilted her head. It was hard to tell if the toast was meant for her or his own growing fondness for Zoe, who was now correcting Camille on the difference between a pumpkin and a squash. Graham added a gentle, to family, before sipping. The moment stretched a little too long between him and Danielle. She looked away first. As they passed dishes down the table, Camille leaned in, her voice honeyed and smooth. Danielle, I imagine this is all a bit overwhelming. I mean, the press, the travel prenups. Vivian, sipping tea at the head of the table, didn't seem to catch the undertone But Danielle did. So did Graham. His jaw tightened. Danielle didn't blink. If love needs a contract, maybe it's not love. Her voice was calm, her smile gentle. Some things are better when they're not negotiated. Camille blinked, taken aback. Miles coughed to cover a grin. Graham stared at Danielle like he was seeing her for the first time. The meal carried on. Conversation flowed from childhood stories to the time Vivian tried to fry a turkey and set off the fire alarm. Zoe laughed so hard sweet tea nearly came out her nose. Danielle gently wiped her niece's chin with a cloth napkin, her fingers soft, her gaze tender. Later, after dessert, pecan pie, apple crumble, and a surprisingly fluffy pumpkin mousse, Danielle helped Vivian into the sunroom. The elder woman wore a shawl of fine wool and clutched a cup of peppermint tea with both hands. "You made today feel lighter," Vivian said. "Like the heaviness I've carried for so long lifted a bit." I've seen Graham smile more in the past day than in the past 3 years. Danielle didn't know what to say. She just nodded. Vivian smiled and began knitting again, her needles clicking gently. "This scarf is for you, you know. Just in case." "In case of what?" Danielle asked softly. "In case you stay?" Danielle's chest fluttered. "You don't even know me." Vivian looked up, eyes wise and clear. "Honey, some people you recognize with your spirit. You feel like peace." Danielle rose to kiss her cheek, blinking quickly. "Let me check on Zoe." As she walked back down the hallway, she noticed Graham standing at the base of the staircase. He'd been watching something soft in his eyes. "You okay?" she asked. "I haven't felt this peaceful in years," he said, his voice low. She paused, one hand on the banister, unsure of how to respond. The house was full of warm light and echoing laughter, but the quiet between them felt like the deepest part of the day. Zoe was already in her pajamas, purple flannel, covered in tiny foxes, when Danielle walked into the guest's bedroom. The little girl was sitting cross-legged on the bed, furiously coloring in a new drawing, with her tongue poking slightly from the corner of her mouth. The waxy smell of crayons filled the room. "Hey, superstar," Danielle said softly, crouching beside her. "Time to wind down." Zoe looked up and grinned. "I made something." Danielle sat on the edge of the bed as Zoe held up the picture. It was a crayon family portrait, 4 stick figures under a bright yellow sun. Graham stood on one side, smiling wide in a blue shirt. Danielle beside him, in a green dress, holding Zoe's hand. And there, sitting peacefully in a rocking chair under a giant oak tree, was Vivian knitting with a ball of purple yarn. "That's beautiful," Danielle whispered, throat tightening. Zoe beamed. "You think he'll like it?" "He'll love it." The little girl slid under the covers as Danielle pulled the quilt up to her chest. The room was quiet, except for the hum of a nearby lamp and the faint piano music drifting up from downstairs. "Did today feel real?" Zoe asked, eyes already starting to close. Danielle brushed a curl away from her niece's forehead. "It felt really good." Zoe nestled into her pillow and yawned. "I like Mr. Graham. He makes you smile like when Mama used to tell jokes." Danielle's smile faded just a little. "Yeah, he's kind." For a few moments she sat there in silence, watching Zoe's breath slow, her small chest rising and falling. Something in her ached, something old and quiet and afraid of hoping. She leaned forward and kissed Zoe's forehead, whispering, "I wish this was real too." The door was half closed, and she didn't hear the soft shuffle just outside until it was too late. Camille stood in the hallway, frozen. Her eyes narrowed, not angry, but calculating. Then, without a word, she turned and walked silently down the hall, heels clicking softly against the hardwood floors. Danielle's breath caught. She rose slowly and shut the door, her hand still resting on the knob. The warmth from the day, the laughter, the closeness. It all felt like something that had slipped through her fingers just a little too fast. And now someone else knew the truth. Danielle was only supposed to play a role, but now she was breaking all her own rules. She sat by the wide bay window in the Langston parlor, knees pulled up beneath her, the half-finished scarf Vivian had started resting in her lap. Outside, Savannah had transformed into a page from an old holiday postcard. Red ribbons tied around iron gas lamps, flickering with a soft golden light. Carolers passed by in matching scarves, their voices blending with the distant clang of church bells. The air had turned crisp, But inside, the heat from the fireplace barely touched the chill Danielle felt inside. Her fingers grazed the yarn soft and purple, and she wondered if Vivian had chosen that color for a reason. Maybe it reminded her of wild violets. Or maybe she'd picked it because it was Zoe's favorite. Either way, Danielle couldn't bring herself to knit another row. Zoe sat on the floor nearby, humming quietly as she dressed a plush bear in holiday-themed clothes she'd found in a donated toy box. Her small voice filled the room with warmth, but Danielle's mind was far away, caught between the role she'd agreed to play and the life she was starting to want against her better judgment. The house was quieter than usual. Graham had gone for a walk, saying he needed air. Camille was upstairs. Vivian had been knitting by the fire earlier, but had quietly excused herself after lunch. Danielle didn't blame her. Things had changed after yesterday's dinner. She could feel it in the way Graham looked at her, now longer with something softer behind his guarded eyes. The way his hand had brushed hers while clearing the table, how he didn't pull away. The laughter they shared over washing dishes hadn't felt staged, and that terrified her, because it wasn't real. Not really. The silence broke with muffled voices upstairs. Danielle wasn't eavesdropping, at least she hadn't meant to, but the tension in Camille's voice slid under the door like smoke. "She's using you, Graham." Can't you see that Camille's voice was sharper than usual, her drawl thinner? "You're falling for a woman who agreed to lie for money." Danielle froze. There was a pause, and then Graham's voice, quieter, tired. "You don't know her, Camille. I know enough. You think this ends with a happy little Christmas card? She's got you wrapped around her finger, and once this fairy tale's over, she'll be gone with your name on every headline if she wants it." Danielle stood slowly, scarf tumbling from her lap, heart pounding so loudly she was sure even Zoe could hear it. She turned toward the hall, but stopped short. Zoe looked up from her bear, sensing something. "Auntie D," the girl asked, tilting her head. "You okay?" Danielle forced a smile and nodded, though her throat ached. "I'm fine, baby. Just thinking too hard." Zoe stood and hugged her leg. "Mama used to say, when your head hurts, listen to your heart instead." Danielle hugged her tightly, eyes burning. Later that afternoon, she wandered the hallway alone and stopped at the landing near the grand staircase. A small table rested under a brass lamp, holding a crystal dish of peppermints and a framed photo, Graham as a baby, chubby cheeks and bright eye, cradled in the arms of a younger, radiant Vivian. The frame was old edges worn from fingers touching it often. Danielle stared at it, overwhelmed by the same wave of guilt that had crept up more and more lately. She had no right to be here, no right to insert herself into this family's fragile story. She was a placeholder in someone else's fairy tale. Downstairs, the clock chimed 3 times. She had to go. Vivian was in the sunroom watching sparrows flit between the camellias. The scarf she'd been knitting was draped over her knees. Danielle stepped in, hands clenched at her sides. "Vivian," she began gently, "I wanted to say thank you." Vivian looked up slowly, her face kind but guarded. I've stayed longer than I planned," Danielle said. "Zoe and I should probably be heading home tomorrow morning." Vivian's knitting paused, needles suspended in midair. Her eyes flickered over Danielle's face. She didn't look surprised, just older somehow. "I see," she said after a moment. "I never meant to." Vivian held up a hand. "You've brought warmth into this house, Danielle. You and Zoe both. That's all I'll say." Danielle bit her lip. "I didn't want to make things complicated." Vivian leaned back in her chair and smiled, but it was laced with sadness. "Things were already complicated. That's why your presence was such a gift." Danielle's heart twisted. That night, while Zoe dozed on the couch, her head on Miles's shoulder, as they watched an old Christmas cartoon, Danielle stood in the guest bedroom packing their small suitcase. Folded clothes, crayons. The drawing Zoe had made of them all beneath a big oak tree. Graham appeared in the doorway, his tie-gone shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, but not from work. "You're leaving," he said quietly. She didn't turn. "It's time." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Why?" She closed the suitcase. "Because this wasn't supposed to feel like home." He came closer. "But it does, doesn't it?" Danielle turned to face him, tears brimming in her eyes. "That's the problem." Danielle's hands clenched at her sides. The firelight from the hallway flickered behind Graham, casting long shadows into the room. He didn't move any closer, and for some reason that made it harder. I told myself I could do this, she said. Just play the part. Keep it simple. Stay in my lane. Graham studied her, his voice low. And now, Danielle let out a breath that quivered at the end. Now I can't tell where the part ends and where I begin. And that's dangerous for me, for Zoe, for everyone. You think this was easy for me? He asked, stepping forward now. Do you think I planned any of this? I lied to my mother because I didn't want her to worry while she was fighting for her life. And then you walked into that diner, and I thought just for a moment you could help fix it. Just for a weekend. He shook his head, voice hoarse. And then you made her laugh. You made her knit again. You made me. Danielle looked up sharply. Don't say it if you don't mean it. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Graham stepped back. You're right. I don't know what this is. Danielle nodded slowly, as if she'd been bracing for those exact words. Neither do I. He glanced at the packed suitcase. You could stay. Just one more day. That's the kind of just one more that turns into never leaving. And I can't do that. I have a life, maybe not a fancy one, but it's mine. I need to show Zoe that we don't stay where we're not truly wanted. You are wanted, he said too fast. Danielle smiled sadly. By who, Graham? You. Or the version of me that fits the lie. She turned away, wiping at her face, and moved to tuck Zoe's sketchpad into the outer pocket of the suitcase. Graham didn't stop her. His hands hung uselessly by his sides. Downstairs, faint piano music drifted up again, an old recording of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. Danielle couldn't help but laugh under her breath at the irony. The holidays had a cruel way of making everything feel more tender than it really was. Later, after Zoe was bathed and tucked into bed, Danielle sat beside her for a while, brushing her fingers through the little girl's soft curls. The girl murmured in her sleep, still dreaming. Will Mr. Graham come too? She asked, eyes fluttering behind closed lids. Danielle's breath hitched. She leaned down and whispered, No, baby. But he was nice, wasn't he? Zoe gave a sleepy smile. He made the best eggs. Danielle chuckled softly. He really did. The moment felt too still, too sacred. She stood, picked up her coat, and walked quietly down the stairs. The house seemed to sense her decision. It creaked inside like it already knew someone was leaving. She passed through the parlor where Vivian's knitting basket sat undisturbed beside the fire. The half-finished purple scarf peeked out from under a skein of wool. Danielle paused, touched it gently, and felt something sharp twist behind her ribs. She took the scarf back upstairs and laid it in her lap one last time, curling into the armchair near the window. She didn't add, a stitch didn't move a needle. She just held it until the clock chimed midnight. The house was still dark when Danielle eased the front door closed behind her. The December morning air bit at her skin sharper than the previous nights, even in Savannah. She adjusted Zoe's coat, the girl still wrapped in a sleepy bundle, against her shoulder, head resting heavily on Danielle's neck. Her niece stirred faintly, but didn't wake. Danielle didn't bring the suitcase out. She'd packed it the night before, quietly slid it down the back stairs, while the rest of the house slept. Miles had offered to drive them, but she'd declined. This goodbye needed to be quiet, clean. She paused on the wraparound porch, taking in the Langston estate one last time. The garlands along the railing swayed gently, pine-scented and speckled with red velvet bows. The wreath on the door behind her was fresh hand-tied with sprigs of holly and dried oranges. Every detail looked pulled from a magazine. And yet, it had started to feel like something real. Danielle took the half-finished scarf from the crook of her arm and turned toward the wicker basket beside the porch swing. She knelt, gently folded the purple scarf and placed it on top of Vivian's yarn and needles. A small part of her wanted to leave a note, but what would it say? Thank you for letting me pretend no. Some goodbyes should stay wordless. The street was still empty. The sky was just beginning to bloom from black to indigo. A dog barked 2 blocks away, answered by a second one farther down. Danielle adjusted Zoe again and stepped off the porch. She didn't look back. Downstairs, sunlight had just begun creeping through the lace curtains when Vivian Langston entered the parlor. She moved slower now. The cancer treatments had left her bones hollow and her steps tentative. But she had slept through the night, which was a rare gift, and she felt the pull of her knitting basket as soon as her slippers brushed the rug. She hadn't touched it since the day before. She'd assumed she'd finish the scarf with Danielle by the end of the weekend. Maybe even teach her a more complex pattern the way she'd once taught her own sons. But when she lowered herself into her chair and reached for the yarn, her hand met something unexpected. The scarf carefully folded. It looked the same. Same stitches, same rich lavender color. But it was no longer in her lap, no longer a shared project. Vivian's fingers brushed the wool, and her breath caught in her throat. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She'd felt the shift in the house the night before. The way Graham had gone silent at dinner. The way Camille had stayed glued to his side like a shadow. The way Danielle's smile had been tight and tired, like someone pretending not to ache. Vivian picked up the scarf and brought it close. A single strand of hair, a deep brown curl, was tangled gently in the yarn. She pressed the scarf to her chest, closed her eyes, and let the first tear fall. No one saw her cry. Not the maid setting the table in the kitchen, not the gardener sweeping pine needles from the walkway, not even Miles, who would come down an hour later asking if anyone had seen Zoe. It was just Vivian, the firelight, and the silence of a house that had briefly remembered joy. Danielle thought she closed the chapter, but when the letter arrived, she couldn't stop shaking. She had just returned from the grocery store, a plastic bag clutched in one hand, and Zoe's tiny pink mittens dangling from the other when she spotted it. A cream-colored envelope sat tucked beneath her apartment door. The corners curled from the drafty hallway air. It wasn't postmarked, no stamp, no formal delivery. Just her name, Danielle Holmes, in elegant cursive, like the ink itself had been pressed with care. Zoe tugged at her coat. "Auntie D, can we make hot chocolate with the little marshmallows?" Danielle nodded absently. "Go wash up, baby." Her fingers trembled as she turned the envelope over. Something was folded inside, a piece of soft wool, familiar in weight and texture before her eyes even registered it. The half-finished scarf. Only now it was whole. Nestled in its loops was the letter written in looping script that smelled faintly of lavender and tea. "Danielle, you don't have to pretend to be family. You already are. Love, Vivian." She sat on the edge of her faded couch, the scarf pooled in her lap like a blanket of memory. Savannah's weak winter light filtered through the window, brushing the cursive words in gold. She hadn't expected to feel so much, not after everything, not after walking away. The letter held more than just Vivian's words. It held warmth, forgiveness, and invitation. Zoe padded out from the bathroom, hair damp and curly. She caught sight of the scarf eyes going wide. "Is that the one she was making for you?" Danielle nodded slowly. "Yes." Vivian finished it. Zoe grinned. "Then I guess she wants us to come back, huh?" Before Danielle could answer, Zoe had already run to her tiny suitcase in the hallway. "I'm packing Sparkle Bear and my green sweater. The one Miles said made me look like a little tree." Danielle tried to smile, but her chest was tight. She wasn't sure if the ache inside was hope or heartbreak trying to slip through the cracks. A second envelope fell out as she folded the scarf. This one was sealed, addressed to Miss Danielle Holmes in the same neat hand, but this time with a printed return address, Langston Estate. Inside was a plane ticket, one way. She stared at it for a long moment, then tucked it into the letter's crease. The heat in the room felt heavier now, too close around her ribs. She walked to the tiny kitchen, started the kettle for Zoe's cocoa, and noticed a draft coming from the living room window. It was cracked slightly, letting in the December air. Danielle didn't remember leaving it open. Across the street, a group of kids were singing carols under blinking holiday lights. Their voices were off-key, but full of joy. And for a second, Danielle let herself imagine what it might be like to hear those carols outside the Langston house with a fire crackling inside, and Vivian humming to herself while Graham and Zoe strung ornaments on the tree. But that wasn't reality. Reality was bills overdue, and trust too fragile to mend with one letter. Still, she folded the scarf carefully as if wrapping a decision inside it. The cab rolled past the edge of Savannah's historic district, where the old oaks arched above the streets like quiet sentinels and fairy lights twinkled between red ribbons tied to gas lamps. Danielle sat in the back seat, Zoe beside her, clutching Sparkle Bear and peering eagerly out the window. Graham's estate appeared suddenly rising from the shadows like something pulled from a memory. White columns wrapped in cedar garlands, windows glowing with amber light. The front door had a new wreath, now holly-dried oranges and cinnamon sticks tied in plaid ribbon. A tall tree sparkled through the parlor window, trimmed with glass ornaments and golden bows. Danielle's breath caught. She hadn't planned on saying yes, but she had read Vivian's letter twice more. The next morning, and when Miles sent a short text, "You left too soon. Come back." It tipped something inside her. Not a decision, a direction. The cab slowed, gravel crunching softly under the tires. Zoe bounced excitedly in her seat. "Are we here already? I didn't even finish my gummies." Danielle smiled. "That's because you talked the whole ride, baby." Zoe giggled, then turned serious. "Do you think Mr. Graham will be happy to see us?" Danielle hesitated. "I don't know, sweet pea. We'll find out." The front door opened before they reached the steps. Graham stood there still in a navy sweater and jeans, hair tousled like he'd been raking his hands through it. He didn't move at first. His eyes locked onto Danielle, then shifted to Zoe, then back again, blinking like he wasn't sure she was real. Danielle smoothed her coat, heart pounding. "Just for the weekend," she said, stepping forward. His lips parted, but no words came. Zoe waved. "Hi, Mr. Graham. We came back. Do you still have that cocoa with the cinnamon on top?" That made him laugh, soft, surprised. "Yeah, I think I can find some." Zoe skipped past him into the house like she'd never left. Graham didn't take his eyes off Danielle. "I didn't think you'd come," he finally said. "I almost didn't," she replied, her voice lower than she meant it to be. They stood there for a beat too long, the December air swirling between them. "You look," he started, then stopped. "Cold. Come in." Inside, the warmth hit instantly, fire crackling in the hearth, scent of pine and gingerbread, a pot of cider warming on the stove. Zoe's laughter drifted in from the hallway, where Miles was showing her a wooden puzzle, her name already engraved on it in smooth block letters. Danielle took off her coat slowly. Graham held it for her without asking, and she let him. "Vivian's upstairs resting," he said. "But she asked me every hour if I thought you'd come." Danielle folded her hands. "And what did you say?" "I said I hoped you would, but I wasn't sure I deserved it." Silence again. Not awkward, just full. They ended up walking later that night after Zoe had gone to bed, and Vivian had called Danielle into her room just to hold her hand for a few minutes. Now the two of them moved through the neighborhood beneath a string of white lights looped between lampposts, their footsteps muffled by soft pine needles. Graham carried a thermos of cider. Danielle walked with her hands tucked into her sleeve, scarf snug around her neck. "I never meant for this to be more than a favor," he said, finally breaking the silence. "I lied to my mother because I didn't want her last holidays to be filled with pity. I thought I could fake something for her sake." Danielle watched him from the corner of her eye. "And then," he took a breath, "and then you walked into that diner. And suddenly, it didn't feel like a lie anymore." They reached the corner where a choir of teenagers was rehearsing carols on the church steps. "O Holy Night" drifted faintly behind them. "I told myself not to get attached to you, to this place. But Zoe called this the house that smelled like hugs. And Vivian gave me a scarf she didn't have to finish." He looked down at her eyes, earnest. "I never wanted to hurt you, Danielle. I don't know what to call this, but I know it matters." She stopped walking. So did he. Danielle looked up, eyes catching his in the soft light. "Then let's stop pretending." And before she could second guess it, before fear could rise again, she leaned up and kissed him, soft, unsure, but real. His breath caught in his throat. When she stepped back, her voice was quiet but firm. "If you want this, show me with truth." The kiss lingered in the cool night air, long after their lips parted. Danielle stood there, her breath shallow, her gaze searching his. Graham didn't move at first. His hands remained at his sides, clenched and trembling slightly, as if holding back something far more volatile than emotion. A single snowflake, too early for Savannah, drifted between them and melted before reaching the sidewalk. Danielle swallowed. "Say something." Graham exhaled slowly. "You caught me off guard." "That much I figured." He looked at her, Really look this time, not just at her warmth or strength or the way she'd slipped so easily into his mother's heart, but at the woman who had shown up again, unasked, uncompensated, unguarded. Her courage unnerved him more than her beauty ever had. I wasn't expecting that, he said. I still feel like I owe you something. Like I should hand you another envelope just for walking back through my door. She blinked, surprised by the tension in his voice. Graham, if you think I came back for... I don't... He cut in gently but firm. That's the point. I know you didn't. He took a slow step forward. When you left, something cracked open, he said. I don't think it was just about you and Zoe leaving. I think it was what it showed me about myself. Danielle lowered her eyes, feeling the weight of his honesty settle around them like mist. They walked again quietly, around the corner and past the wrought iron gates of a nearby park where light spilled across frost-kissed benches. He paused by one, gesturing for her to sit. She hesitated, then joined him, pulling her coat tighter. I've done a lot of things in my life that made people like Camille think they were protecting me, he said. But I've also spent a lot of years making sure no one got close enough to really see me. Not even my mom. Not even Miles. Danielle looked out toward the black silhouettes of trees, her gloved hands folding into her lap. You don't owe me a confession, Graham. He gave a soft, almost bitter laugh. No, but I think I owe myself one. He shifted toward her. There's something you should know. I've had panic attacks since I was 19. My dad died suddenly, and I never dealt with it. I buried it in work success distractions. The whole marriage lie. It started as a defense because Mom was relapsing, and I didn't want her to worry about me being alone. But I was alone, and I was angry about it. So I invented something better. Danielle's brows pulled together. You invented me. He flinched. I didn't mean, she nodded slowly. I know what you meant. I just didn't expect you to become real, he whispered. And once you were, it got harder to admit how many lies were holding up everything around you. Danielle sat still for a moment. Then her voice low asked, Is this the truth part? He nodded. She turned to face him. Good. Because I meant what I said after that kiss. If we're going forward, no more pretending. Not with your mom, not with Zoe, not with each other. His jaw worked silently. Then there's something you need to know, he said, voice suddenly heavier. Her breath caught. Graham leaned closer, eyes no longer uncertain, but clear and grave. About me, he said. A beat. About everything. Graham Langston had built his empire on strategy, but for the first time, his heart was running the show. The house was quieter than usual. Outside, Savannah whispered the promise of snow, a rare hush blanketing the city beneath glowing lanterns and red velvet bows. The streets shimmered with Christmas magic, and inside the Langston estate, a softer kind of transformation had taken place. Not just garlands draped over the stair railings, or the smell of cinnamon and pine, but warmth. Real warmth. Danielle stood in the hallway near the den, her fingertips brushing the finished edge of the scarf Vivian had made for her. She wore it loosely over a soft cranberry sweater, and her hair, freshly moisturized and coiled, framed her face with quiet grace. It had been 2 days since she returned. 2 days of tentative peace, shared glances, long walks, and a few good silences that said more than words. In the parlor, Zoe sat cross-legged by the fireplace, building towers out of gingerbread men and humming Silent Night under her breath. The scent of spiced cider floated in from the kitchen, and somewhere upstairs Vivian was finishing her knitting by lamplight. Danielle turned when she heard the creak of the floor behind her. Graham. He wore a navy cashmere sweater, sleeves pushed up to his elbows, and there was something different in his eyes tonight. Less guarded, less calculating. Just him. Can we talk? He asked, voice quiet. She nodded, following him into his study. The fireplace there was low and glowing, casting amber light on the bookshelves and a framed sketch of the Savannah skyline. Graham poured 2 glasses of cider and handed her one. I meant to tell you this before he began, but I couldn't get the words right. Maybe because I've spent so long building things. Companies, reputations, barriers, but not relationships. Danielle sat, one leg tucked beneath her eyes, steady on him. My dad died the summer after I graduated high school. Graham continued. Heart attack. He was healthy 1 minute, gone the next. I was supposed to start at Stanford in the fall, but I stayed home that year. Helped Mom with the estate with Miles, with holding it all together. I think something broke in me that year. Not just grief, something colder. I decided emotions were liabilities. He laughed under his breath. And I got really good at being strong, or at least pretending to be. Danielle didn't speak. She just listened, fingers wrapped around her warm mug. I told myself success would fill the space he left, that if I could just prove I was never the weak one, no one could hurt me again. And did it? She asked softly. He looked up. No. It just made me lonely in better rooms. Her throat tightened. I thought I needed someone perfect, he said. Then I realized I needed someone real. Danielle blinked hard, her voice wavering. Graham, I thought if people knew what I'd been through, the jobs I lost, the men who left, the years I could barely feed Zoe, that no one would want me. He shook his head, inching closer. Danielle, I don't want a version of you that looks better on paper. I want the woman who told my mother the truth through a prayer, who taught my niece how to draw angels with afros, and who didn't take a dime from me to come back. She looked down at her lap, blinking. I almost didn't. But you did, he whispered. That's everything. Just then a soft knock echoed from the door frame. Vivian, elegant in a wool robe and velvet slippers, held a small navy box tied with gold ribbon. May I? She asked. Graham stood. Of course. Vivian stepped forward, her gaze warm. Danielle, I've been watching you. Not in the way that makes people uncomfortable. Though you've probably noticed, I don't miss much. Danielle gave a watery smile. You're very observant. Vivian chuckled. I see what matters. And what I see in you is peace. She handed Danielle the box. This was my mother's. She passed it to me when I told her I'd found the kind of love that lasts past hardship. Now I'd like to pass it to you, not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. Danielle opened it slowly. Nestled inside was a delicate sapphire brooch wrapped in vintage lace. It's beautiful, she breathed. It's yours, Vivian said. Welcome home. Danielle remained still, holding the velvet box, as if it might disappear if she blinked. Vivian gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder, then excused herself with the grace of someone who knew her. Words had landed exactly where they needed to. When the study door clicked shut behind her, Danielle looked back at Graham. He wasn't saying anything, just watching her with an expression that made her chest ache. I don't know what to say, she finally whispered. You don't have to, Graham said, standing. But there's something I'd like to show you. She followed him down the hallway and through a side door she hadn't noticed before. The space beyond was dim but cozy, a former sunroom now repurposed as a sort of creative nook. On the desk beneath the window sat a spread of hand-sketched blueprints. Danielle leaned in, puzzled at first, until she saw it. A cottage. Simple, elegant lines. 2 bedrooms, wraparound porch, fireplace. Her throat caught when she recognized the tree in the sketch, an old oak in the far end of Graham's backyard, the same one Zoe had tried to name during their walk last week. It's beautiful, Danielle murmured. I had it drawn up a while ago, Graham admitted. Didn't know what I was building it for at the time. Just something quiet, something close, not an office, not a guest suite, something more permanent. She looked at him, heart racing. You were building a house, not just a house. His voice dropped. A beginning, if you want it. Danielle turned toward the blueprint again, her eyes tracing the small kitchen, the sunlit living space, the cozy alcove marked reading nook. I don't want you to feel pressured, Graham said gently, or cornered. You don't owe me anything. But I needed to show you that I'm not asking for pretend. I'm not offering a transaction. This isn't a role. It's a place, a real one. He stepped back, giving her room. Danielle didn't answer right away. Her mind was full of laughter and silence, of scarves and second chances, of a small girl sleeping peacefully, just 2 rooms away, knowing the world was finally starting to make sense. She turned to face him fully. You're not the only one who's scared, she said. I've spent years believing love was something I had to earn or perform, that if I stopped proving myself, it would leave. Graham's eyes softened. But this, she gestured toward the sketch, this feels like an invitation, not a test. It is. She took a shaky breath, then asked me the real question. Graham smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just honest. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his sweater and the cedarwood scent she'd come to associate with comfort. Danielle Holmes, he said, voice low. Will you stay? Not for pretend holidays or appearances, but because you want to build something that lasts. Tears welled in her eyes, and this time she didn't blink them back. I came here as your lie, she said slowly, but I'm staying as your truth. He let out a breath that sounded like years of silence finally breaking. Danielle leaned in, resting her forehead against his. The moment was quiet, steady, like a note held perfectly in tune. From somewhere in the house, a clock chimed midnight. Christmas Eve had arrived. They didn't speak. They just stood there, two souls meeting where plans had once been drawn and discarded. And outside, through the tall window panes, the first flakes of snow began to fall. In Savannah, a miracle in itself. By morning, the snow had not only continued, it had settled. Light, soft flakes danced through the air as Savannah awakened beneath a delicate white veil. It clung to church steeples and traced the edges of wrought iron balconies. On Langston Estate, the gardens wore powdered coats, and even the oaks, those sprawling unbothered sentinels, seemed gentled by it. Inside the estate, warmth bloomed. Vivian was up early, humming carols under her breath as she stirred a pot of spiced cider. The scent of cinnamon and cloves drifted through the kitchen, mixing with pine from the Christmas tree and the faint vanilla from Zoe's gingerbread-decorated hands. Danielle stood near the fireplace, still barefoot, watching the flames flicker. She held the sapphire pendant Vivian had given her the night before, the chain now around her neck. Graham appeared behind her, holding two mugs. Didn't sleep. I did, she said, turning. But I woke up feeling different. Good, different, she nodded. Like I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. They sat in silence for a while, sipping cider. Zoe's muffled giggles echoed down the hallway as she played with Miles, who'd somehow gotten her to try hot cocoa with marshmallows the size of her fist. Camille texted Graham, said suddenly, "She's not coming back." Danielle didn't flinch. I figured. She said she needed to find something real too. Danielle looked into the fire. I hope she does. He reached for her hand, letting the weight of that choice settle quietly between them. Later that evening, the long dining table came to life once again. No longer with silver chargers or stiff floral arrangements, but with laughter and passing plates. Miles told a story about Graham's college roommate who tried to impress girls with card tricks. Vivian chuckled so hard she had to wipe her eyes. Zoe sat at the head of the table in Graham's old seat, wearing one of Danielle's scarves like a crown. In front of her was a half-finished wooden puzzle Graham had given her earlier, a handcrafted piece with her name etched into the corner. I'm almost done, she declared proudly. You've got time, Danielle smiled. Dinner's not going anywhere. When dessert came, Vivian's pecan pie and gingerbread men in various stages of frosting chaos. Danielle reached for another slice, and Graham leaned over. Do you regret it? She glanced at him, saying yes. Coming back. Danielle paused, watching as Vivian lifted her tea with slightly trembling hands, the sapphire ring catching candlelight. Miles tossed a napkin at Zoe, who retaliated with a spoonful of whipped cream. The house buzzed with a kind of peace she'd never known, but had always hoped existed. No, she said. I think I found what I didn't know I was looking for. He didn't reply, he just watched her the way he always did now, without agenda, without calculation, just present. After dinner, they drifted outside to the wraparound porch. The wind had stilled, and the sky opened to stars sharp enough to etch the night. Danielle pulled her coat tighter, stepping into the snow. Graham followed, brushing flakes from her curls, his hand lingering at the nape of her neck. Zoe pressed her face to the window, from inside squealing when she saw the snow piling against the stairs. Within seconds, the door burst open, and she came charging out, boots, untied scarf, dragging behind her cheeks, flushed. It's Christmas, she shouted, throwing her arms wide. Danielle laughed, catching her before she slipped on the porch. Zoe hugged her tightly, then looked up at Graham. And we're not pretending anymore. The words hung in the air, simple and unshakable. Danielle looked up at Graham, and something unspoken passed between them. Not a promise, not a performance, just truth. And under Savannah's rare and silent snowfall, it was enough. Sometimes what begins as a lie leads us straight to the truth. Under snowfall and soft light, two strangers who had every reason to doubt each other instead chose kindness and found something real. Because love doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it walks in with second-hand shoes and borrowed faith, quietly rewriting what we thought we knew about worth. Like a porch light left on in the cold, a simple act of compassion can guide even the most guarded hearts home. And if this story touched yours, perhaps today is the day to believe, just for a moment, that goodness still finds a way back.